what if the most dangerous betrayal does not come from enemies on the battlefield, but from the very hearts we trust the most? Today, we confront a forbidden question. Is there an instinctual pattern of feminine treachery buried deep in human nature? And why has it been banned from discussion? By the end of this exploration, you'll see why ignoring this truth has left countless men powerless in love, society, and history itself. Every human bond is a contract between desire and deception. Nowhere is this more evident than in the union between man and woman, where tenderness and treachery spring from the same source of hidden instinct. What civilization calls love is often a fragile pact, upheld only so long as repression holds back darker impulses. Yet, beneath the polished courtesies of society, there lingers an unconscious urge to dominate, to betray, to turn intimacy into a stage for hidden rivalries. The banned concept of feminine treachery lies buried in what I call the black book of human nature, a chapter suppressed because it forces us to see how disloyalty is not an accident, but an ancient, recurring drive. In this script, we uncover those buried instincts, not to condemn, but to understand the shadows that shape every human bond. The subject of treachery, especially in its feminine form, cannot be reduced to moral judgment or casual accusation. It belongs to the deepest substrata of the unconscious, a place where instincts are not concerned with virtue or vice, but only with survival, gratification, and the endless balancing of repression against expression. To understand feminine treachery, one must first strip away the illusions of civilization. The polished roles of wife, lover, mother, and daughter are but costumes stitched together by society's demands. Beneath these carefully maintained disguises lies a raw psychic struggle, the simultaneous urge to bond and to betray, to nurture and to undo, to love and to destroy. From the earliest stages of development, the child experiences ambivalence toward the mother, the source of comfort and nourishment, yet also the first figure capable of withholding affection, of frustrating need, of creating anxiety through absence. In this primal relationship, one detects the seeds of loyalty and disloyalty. The child both clings to the mother and resents her power. It is this ambivalence, buried deep in the unconscious, that later resurfaces in adult relationships. When woman becomes the object of man's desire, she also becomes the figure who holds the terrifying potential to withhold, to manipulate, to betray. Treachery in the feminine, then, is not an invention of culture, but a reawakening of the earliest psychic dynamics. This drive remains hidden because it conflicts with the public image of woman as the preserver of bonds, the custodian of affection, and the moral center of the household. Yet the unconscious is indifferent to social ideals. What it conceals, it eventually reveals in symbolic form, through subtle sabotage, secret withholding, or the quiet turning of intimacy into a battlefield of hidden rivalries. The betrayal is often not overt. It may manifest in an emotional withdrawal, an unspoken contempt, or the strategic use of sexuality not as union but as leverage. Thus, treachery is not always dramatic. It is frequently silent, almost invisible, operating behind the veil of tenderness. Why does this hidden drive exist? At its root is the duality of Eros and Thanatos, the instinct to preserve and the instinct to undo. The woman, like the man, is driven by both, yet her social role has historically demanded concealment. The repression of destructive impulses does not eliminate them, it forces them underground. And when instincts are repressed, they return disguised, transformed into gestures of cunning, secrecy, and treachery. What appears as affection on the surface may mask resentment underneath. What seems like loyalty may hide an unconscious wish to undo, to humiliate, to destabilize the very bond she outwardly protects. One must not confuse this drive with conscious calculation alone. Treachery, in its most primal form, does not always arise from deliberate planning. It is often an eruption of unconscious forces, disguised even from the woman herself. She may believe she acts out of love, while simultaneously enacting betrayal. Her words of devotion may coexist with unconscious acts of sabotage. In psychoanalytic terms, treachery is not a moral failing, but the return of repressed impulses, the inevitable leakage of what cannot be contained forever. This is why men throughout history have found themselves bewildered by sudden reversals of loyalty, by betrayals that seemed inexplicable, by acts of disloyalty carried out by those who professed the deepest love. What they encountered was not a simple defect of character, but the surfacing of an ancient drive. The feminine unconscious holds within it both the capacity to nurture and the urge to destroy. The two are inseparable, woven together like strands of the same thread. To love fully is also to hold the power to betray fully. The intensity of one mirrors the possibility of the other. The most disturbing aspect of this hidden drive is its subtlety. Male treachery, when it appears, often carries the stamp of direct aggression. It seeks domination through visible force or obvious infidelity. The feminine form, however, operates in shadows, hidden behind gestures of affection, disguised as passivity or encoded in silence. Civilization itself has trained woman to cultivate this indirect form of influence, since overt hostility was often forbidden to her. Over centuries, this prohibition has refined treachery into an art of concealment. Thus, the unconscious and society have conspired together to shape a form of betrayal that is not only instinctual, but also culturally perfected. This hidden drive reveals itself most clearly in moments of crisis, when bonds of civilization weaken, during famine, war, or social collapse. The mask of loyalty often slips away. The feminine psyche, freed from the constraints of culture, allows repressed drives to surface more openly. What appears shocking to men in such moments is, in fact, only the unveiling of what was always present beneath repression. Civilization had merely covered it with layers of etiquette, duty, and performance. In the absence of those coverings, the ancient impulse to betray emerges unmasked, revealing itself as part of human nature's darker inheritance. To understand feminine treachery, one must therefore look beyond surface morality and cultural myth. It is not an aberration, not a defect limited to particular women, but a universal drive embedded in the unconscious, waiting for opportunity to express itself. The challenge lies in recognizing that loyalty and treachery are not opposites but companions, each arising from the same subterranean forces, each inseparable from the other. To deny this truth is to remain blind to the deepest dynamics of human relationships, where the promise of devotion always carries within it the shadow of betrayal. Every human bond is shaped by the duality of instinct. At the foundation of all desire lies Eros, the drive toward union, creation, preservation, and intimacy. Yet shadowing it at every turn is its darker counterpart, the drive toward destruction. These forces are not separable. They are twin currents within the same psyche, bound together in an unresolvable tension. When one speaks of feminine treachery, it is not an isolated phenomenon, but a direct consequence of this fusion, where the instinct that gives rise to love is inseparably entwined with the instinct that carries the seed of betrayal. To speak of devotion without acknowledging destruction is to look at only half of human nature. Eros, in its pure form, seeks closeness, It draws individuals into attachment, compels woman toward man, and mother toward child. It is responsible for the tenderness that sustains human life, the loyalty that nurtures, and the pleasure that binds. But every act of union awakens an unconscious counterforce. With intimacy comes vulnerability, and with vulnerability arises resentment. The very surrender that Eros demands awakens a secret wish to undo the other, to regain power lost in the act of love. Thus, the same instinct that builds loyalty simultaneously plants the desire to sabotage it. Treachery emerges not as the negation of love, but as its silent twin. Nowhere is this paradox more visible than in the female psyche. Woman is often seen as the embodiment of nurturance, the vessel of life, the caretaker of bonds. Yet beneath that image, the unconscious reveals a more complex pattern. Her capacity for intimacy is immense, but so too is her capacity for concealed hostility. In her, Eros and destruction rarely appear separately. They converge, overlap, and feed one another. To draw a man into her embrace is also, at an unconscious level, to gain power over him, to render him vulnerable, and thereby to hold the potential for his undoing. Love becomes a stage on which tenderness and treachery act out their eternal rivalry. The expression of this duality is often subtle. For instance, the same gesture of affection that unites may also conceal a hidden resentment. The kiss that binds may also symbolically conquer. In acts of intimacy, one detects both the desire to give pleasure and the wish to control through that pleasure. The act of nurturing often carries an undercurrent of ambivalence. The desire to sustain and simultaneously to remind the other of dependency. Woman's treachery does not always declare itself with open betrayal. It is more frequently entwined with acts of love themselves, hidden in their very structure, as if destruction is stitched into the fabric of devotion. Consider the jealous lover, whose attachment to a man is so intense that it cannot tolerate any rival. Her jealousy is born from Eros, from the desire to keep the bond intact, yet it often manifests as acts of sabotage, manipulation, or revenge. In such cases, love and destruction cannot be distinguished. The same passion that fuels loyalty ignites the fire of treachery. To love fiercely is also to risk destroying fiercely, for the instinct cannot be divided into separate compartments. The unconscious knows no boundary between giving life and withdrawing it, between nourishing and punishing. This paradox becomes clearer when one observes the recurring patterns in history and literature. Tales of women who appeared utterly devoted yet turned to betrayal at the moment of greatest intimacy reflect not isolated acts, but a universal psychic truth. The destructive impulse does not arise in spite of love, but because of it. In the deepest recesses of the unconscious, love without the possibility of destruction does not exist. The intensity of one is measured by the intensity of the other. Where there is great passion, there is also the potential for great treachery. Where there is attachment strong enough to bind, there is also hostility strong enough to unbind. Civilization attempts to deny or repress this duality by elevating ideals of pure loyalty, unconditional devotion, and eternal union. Yet repression does not eradicate the destructive instinct. It drives it underground, where it emerges in distorted forms. A woman who is expected to embody only Eros cannot fully acknowledge her resentment, her hostility, or her unconscious wish to undo. As a result, these impulses seep into her actions indirectly, through subtle cruelty, manipulative silence, or carefully disguised betrayal. By forbidding the recognition of destruction, society ensures that treachery is not eliminated, but merely concealed, made more elusive, more insidious, more difficult to detect. The intimacy between man and woman is therefore never free of this tension. Each embrace is a union not only of affection, but of hidden rivalry. Each bond contains within it the possibility of both protection and sabotage. When man surrenders himself to woman in love, he also surrenders to the possibility of betrayal. For the same hand that comforts can also wound, and the same lips that whisper devotion can utter the words of treachery. In this sense, Eros is never innocent. It always carries with it the silent shadow of destruction, and in the feminine psyche, the two are so deeply interwoven that to try to separate them would be to misunderstand them entirely. The recognition of this interdependence is uncomfortable because it unsettles the foundation of trust upon which intimacy is built. Yet denial only deepens the problem. To insist on seeing woman only as the guardian of affection blinds man to the destructive currents that flow alongside. To recognize that love and betrayal arise from the same unconscious root is to see the human bond in its full, unsettling truth. Devotion and treachery are not opposites, but intertwined expressions of the same instinctual life. Civilization presents itself as the great taming force of human instinct. It claims to refine the raw impulses of the psyche into socially acceptable forms, transforming chaos into order, hostility into cooperation, and unrestrained desire into regulated intimacy. Yet beneath this polished surface lies a truth far less comforting. Civilization does not abolish the destructive forces within human beings. It merely cloaks them. Nowhere is this disguise more apparent than in the realm of feminine treachery. Culture has constructed the image of woman as the guardian of fidelity, the emblem of loyalty, and the moral anchor of family life. Yet this image is less a reflection of reality than a mask, thin, fragile, and designed to conceal the primal undercurrents that society cannot allow to be spoken aloud. The repression demanded by civilization creates an elaborate theater in which instincts perform their roles while hiding their true nature. A woman may be expected to embody devotion, patience, and tenderness, but these expectations do not eliminate the contrary impulses of resentment, rivalry, or betrayal. Instead, they drive these impulses underground into the unconscious, where they continue to operate with undiminished force. What emerges on the surface is a carefully managed performance. Smiles, gestures of affection, words of reassurance, all may serve as masks, concealing the darker currents beneath. Civilization teaches woman to perfect this performance because her survival within the social order has depended on her ability to disguise hostility within the language of loyalty. This mask is not a mere external facade, it becomes internalized. A woman may come to believe in her own performance, unaware of the subterranean hostility shaping her actions. The unconscious speaks not in declarations, but in slips, in silences, in acts of subtle sabotage that contradict the mask of fidelity. She may profess loyalty, while simultaneously enacting betrayal, not through conscious calculation, but through the return of repressed drives that civilization has demanded she conceal. Thus, the very success of the mask ensures the persistence of treachery. The more tightly civilization insists on loyalty as her defining role, the more her unconscious must find indirect ways of expressing the forbidden opposite. The mask also serves another function. It protects men from perceiving the full extent of their vulnerability. Civilization requires the belief that intimacy is safe, that bonds of affection are stable, and that devotion is secure. To acknowledge openly that every act of loyalty carries within it the potential for treachery would destabilize the entire social order. Thus, the mask does not only conceal feminine impulses from others, It shields men from truths they are unwilling to confront. The illusions of civilization are maintained not simply for women's sake, but for the collective psyche's need to believe in stability. This shared denial allows relationships, families, and societies to function, but it does so by sacrificing authenticity to performance. Yet repression has its costs. What is forced into silence does not disappear. The mask of civilization intensifies the pressure within the unconscious until it finds expression in distorted forms. This is why betrayals often seem shocking, sudden, inexplicable. A woman who has long appeared utterly devoted may, without warning, enact a reversal of loyalty that leaves others bewildered. In truth, the betrayal was not sudden. It was the eruption of forces that had long been concealed beneath the mask. Civilization had hidden them so effectively that their eventual emergence seemed like an anomaly, when in fact it was the return of what had been repressed. The mask also refines the form that treachery takes. Because overt hostility is forbidden, betrayal often manifests in indirect ways. Silence becomes a weapon, tenderness becomes conditional, affection is granted or withheld with calculated timing. The destructive instinct, unable to emerge openly, adapts itself to the demands of the mask, becoming subtle, elusive, and therefore all the more difficult to recognize. This refinement of treachery is not a sign of its weakness, but of its sophistication under repression. Civilization, in its attempt to eradicate hostility, instead cultivates a more intricate and concealed form of it. When the structures of civilization weaken, during war, famine, or collapse, the mask itself begins to crack. In such moments, the polished performance of loyalty gives way to the raw expression of instinct. What had been concealed by layers of etiquette and duty emerges openly, revealing the destructive impulses that civilization had only disguised. These moments of rupture expose the truth that treachery was never eliminated, only hidden. They show that beneath the mask of civilization lies a more primal reality, one that does not conform to social ideals, but to the ancient logic of the unconscious. The mask of civilization is therefore both necessary and dangerous. It allows society to function by concealing truths too destabilizing to acknowledge, but it also ensures that those truths remain unresolved and continually resurface in hidden forms. In the case of feminine treachery, the mask sustains the illusion of loyalty while quietly nurturing its opposite, ensuring that devotion and betrayal remain locked together in an endless dance beneath the surface of human relationships. The forbidden concept of feminine treachery cannot be dismissed as myth, nor reduced to individual failing. It is woven into the hidden fabric of human instinct, a product of the unconscious forces that shape every bond. The first keynote revealed the hidden drive itself, born of ambivalence and repressed hostility, always present beneath the mask of tenderness. The second showed how love and betrayal are not opposites but inseparable, with Eros and destruction forever intertwined in the very heart of intimacy. The third exposed how civilization, in its effort to disguise these truths, has only cultivated masks that conceal betrayal while refining its methods. To confront this idea is to accept that devotion and treachery are not distant poles, but twin aspects of the same psychic reality. Civilization builds its stability upon repression, but repression ensures that what is denied will return in disguised, often more destructive forms. The mask may protect, but it also deceives, leaving those who trust it unprepared for the inevitable eruption of what lies beneath. The Black Book of Human Nature, from which this concept is drawn, does not comfort or flatter. It reminds us that human intimacy is never free from shadow. that beneath every oath of loyalty stirs the unconscious possibility of betrayal, and that what society dares not name remains the most dangerous truth of all.